Brad Briggs, editorial director of Street Authority. Welcome to this special video Q&A session. Today I'm sitting down with my colleague, John Persinos, editorial director of Investing Daily. In addition to overseeing the premium publications at our parent company, John also writes the daily stock market recap, Mind Over Markets. You may also know John as editor-in-chief of Marijuana Investing Daily, which brings me to the reason why I'm speaking with John today. You see, John has spent years researching and writing about one of the great new frontiers for profits in the market. I'm talking about cannabis stocks. After years of meticulous research, he recently released The Wide World of Weed and Psychedelics, a book designed to educate and provide investors with specific, actionable advice on how to pick the best pot stocks. As you may know, legalization efforts have been gathering steam at the state and federal levels for a few years now. And this has created a new boom for companies involved in cannabis and related industries. As John puts it, this spells a major opportunity for investors. That's why he held a special town hall on November 1st. You won't want to miss it. In the meantime, to learn more about what's going on in this space and how investors can position themselves to profit, I turn to John for answers. John, first of all, thanks for joining me. Let's get right to it. It's no secret that we're smack dab in the middle of a bear market. So why pot stocks and why now?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Brad. I appreciate it. And I'm pretty passionate about the marijuana market because I think it's a mega trend that will unfold regardless of what happens with the economy. Marijuana investing, it tends to be inflation and recession resistant. And once this bear market is over, marijuana stocks are going to explode on the upside. Right now, marijuana stocks are being weighed down by this overall bear market, but there are a lot of bargains out there. I think that a lot of intrinsically sound cannabis stocks have taken a beating. And once the bear market's over, once some of these headwinds have ended, once inflation is abated and the Fed stops tightening, and I think that's all going to happen sooner than a lot of people think, I think marijuana stocks will reward patient investors.
Now, I hate to bring politics into investing, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. So what are some of the measures on the ballot in this midterm election that investors should be aware of? And the big question is the Biden administration playing ball?
Good question. Politics very much plays a role in marijuana because, after all, marijuana is still illegal on the federal level. Marijuana has been demonized for decades by the war on drugs launched by Richard Nixon in 1971. And there's a lot of cultural baggage surrounding marijuana. But starting with California in 1996, which legalized medicinal marijuana, the states have stepped into the breach. So even though marijuana is still a controlled substance under Schedule 1 under the Controlled Substance Act, because we have the system of federalism, states can enact their own laws. And the Department of Justice many years ago ruled that they would not stand in the way of states that want to legalize marijuana. So right now, 19 states have legalized recreational marijuana. 38 have legalized medical marijuana. And in both cases, that includes the District of Columbia. And the midterm elections in November 8th will prove to be a major profit catalyst for the marijuana industry because in 5 states, Arkansas, Missouri, Maryland, South Dakota, and North Dakota, there are initiatives on the ballot that would propose to voters to legalize marijuana, either medically or recreationally. And in a 6th state, Colorado, there's an initiative on the ballot to legalize psychedelics. And so when a new market is created, when a state legalizes marijuana, that creates a new market. And what does that do? That generates more sales, that creates more customers, and that lifts share prices. And the marijuana legalization is an unstoppable juggernaut. The pot prohibitionists are fighting a losing battle, a rearguard action that is doomed to fail. 68% of Americans say they want marijuana to be legalized. In 1969, when a rather shifty guy named Richard Nixon was in the White House, way back in 1969, that was 12%. And now it's 68%. It's amazing. So legalizing marijuana is wildly popular. There's been a slew of medical research that shows that marijuana has many benefits, that it's been unfairly demonized. The empirical research shows that it can solve a lot of physical and psychological ailments. And Congress could read the polls. And there are a lot of bills to legalize marijuana on the federal level that are in Congress. Several of them have already passed the House. The sticking point is in the 50-50 Senate. But even if, I think it's inevitable that marijuana will be legalized on the federal level. But until that day comes, more and more states are legalizing marijuana. And what's interesting is that red states, states that Trump won, very conservative states, are legalizing marijuana. You asked about President Biden. President Biden has come around, and he now supports marijuana legalization. And if any legalization bill reaches his desk, he will sign it.
That's good stuff. You mentioned Big Pharma earlier. What are some of the ways that they're interested in cannabis? I even hear big alcohol and tobacco are getting in on the action too.
Yeah, well, Big Pharma and marijuana, they're the best of frenemies. At first, Big Pharma was very threatened by marijuana because marijuana can relieve a lot of symptoms that expensive prescription drugs have been trying to address. So Big Pharma, originally, they have a powerful lobbying machine, lobbied against marijuana legalization in a lot of states. But lo and behold, Big Pharma did not succeed. By and large, Big Pharma was unable to stop the legalization freight train. So if you can't beat them, join them. Big Pharma's gotten on the bandwagon, and it's buying up smaller marijuana companies, looking for proprietary technology, looking for companies that have cannabis-based medicines in clinical trials, and folding these companies into their product pipeline. So Big Pharma is co-opting the marijuana industry, and it's the same thing with food and beverage conglomerates. These transnational consumer products companies are buying up marijuana companies that make branded products. Companies that have brands and that have established brand loyalty, they're very desirable. And so the marijuana companies that are doing the best have created marijuana products that have well-known established brands. And the food and beverage companies, they're swooping in, buying up these companies, and they have these ready-made brands that they can then send out through their already established infrastructure and distribution channels. And so you're seeing cannabis-infused beer, all kinds of brands of gummy bears laced with THC. It's a brave new world, and more people can walk into dispensaries and buy marijuana products the way you can walk into a CVS and buy a pack of gum or buy a box of Tic Tacs. And recently, Circle K, it's a chain of gasoline stations and convenience stores, just struck a deal with Green Thumb Industries, whereby Green Thumb will be selling marijuana at Florida gas stations run by Circle K. Now, this is medical marijuana, and only consumers with valid Florida medical marijuana cards can buy it. But still, think about this. You can go to your local Circle K in Florida and say, fill her up and give me an ounce of weed. I never thought I'd live to see this, because I'm old enough to remember, growing up in the 70s, if you were caught with marijuana, you get expelled from school. Your parents would ground you. You'd get arrested. You could do serious jail time. You get thrown out of college. You'd lose your job. And now marijuana is more and more becoming integrated into the consumer mainstream. This is a financial, social, cultural, and political revolution. The time to get in front of this is now, before it becomes legalized on the federal level. Because once it becomes legalized on the federal level, cannabis stocks are going to surge. So you want to start gaining exposure to these stocks before they get bid up and become too expensive. So big pharma is getting on the bandwagon. Big beverage and food companies are getting on the bandwagon. And marijuana, which used to be the devil's weed, is now just another consumer product. And whereby grandparents are taking CBD and eating THC-laced gummy bears to treat their arthritic pain. So this is one of the biggest investment trends I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I think our audience might be surprised to learn is the variety of choices out there for investors.
Right.
Can you tell us about some of the, side plays, picks and shovels opportunities that you found?
Absolutely. I really like the picks and shovels plays. And that term comes from, right now, the marijuana trend, it's called the green rush. And that's a reference to the gold rush in the 19th century when gold prospectors all raced out to California in search of the yellow metal. And it was a frenzy. Well, a handful of prospectors became rich. But you know who really became rich? It was the people who sold the stores, the proprietors who sold picks and shovels to the miners, gave them the equipment to go prospecting for gold. And one of the companies that got the richest from the gold rush, it wasn't a gold miner, it was Levi Strauss. That's how they got their start, selling blue jeans to gold miners. Well, the same thing applies to the same principle does apply to the marijuana industry. That there are companies that make the infrastructure, the products that marijuana companies need, lab testing equipment, hydroponics, the tools needed to grow marijuana. These companies, the companies that provide a value add to the marijuana industry, they're smart investments because they indirectly profit from marijuana. So they're less susceptible to the ups and downs of the marijuana industry, which can be volatile. So these companies have a diverse mix of products, so they're not solely dependent on marijuana, but they make a good chunk of their money from it. So if the marijuana industry goes up, their prospects go up as well. I think one hot area is agriculture, is hydroponics, growing marijuana without soil. So the picks and shovels plays are intriguing, and they're a good bet if you want to make a safer play on marijuana, because these companies, they don't have all their eggs in one basket.
That sounds good. So how can we learn more about the specific opportunities you're finding now?
Well, let me give a shameless plug for my book, The Wide World of Weed and Psychedelics. And we haven't talked much about psychedelics. And let me just say that, the ancillary industry of psychedelics, that's even more amazing than marijuana, actually, because the thought that LSD and magic mushrooms are now being used by mainstream psychotherapists for treatment. Johns Hopkins, the gold standard in medical care, recently opened a psychedelics institute and is conducting clinical trials on people to see how psilocybin, which is the psychoactive ingredient in magic mushrooms, how it can alleviate post-traumatic stress syndrome, depression, anxiety, a whole host of disorders. And even LSD, which we associate with psychedelic rock from the 60s, is becoming mainstream as a medical treatment. That's just mind-boggling. And Big Pharma has taken notice. So that's why it's not just the wide world of weed, it's the wide world of weed and psychedelics. And my book provides specific, actionable advice on how to profit from these fascinating trends that we've been discussing in this video.
Sounds great, John. Thanks for joining me today.
It was my pleasure, Brad. Thank you.